It's been a fantastic success. You just go out there any day, especially on the weekend, and you'll see it's mobbed with people.
The bikeway has been a real plus to the quality of life in these towns. It really sparked, I think, a revolution of people riding bicycles. I never saw so many people riding until the bikeway took hold.
When we first proposed it, many people were very skeptical and very opposed, and one of their predictions was that no one would use it.
It took 18 years to build this thing.
And everything was kind of built. I mean, it was just political resistance. And those inaugural meetings were bloodbaths. You just couldn't get over how ferocious the opposition was.
It requires perseverance, and it requires a thick skin.
I'm really stunned that they did it, that they pulled it off. Almost everywhere you go, people point to this one as a real model. This is the one that works better than almost anyone in America, and it's really unique. It's the main street. It's where you actually talk to people. It's really where you see your neighbors. The entire community is on this path, and it is the spectrum of users from 8-year-olds to 80-year-olds, and that's what it should be.
As the Minuteman Commuter Bikeway celebrates 25 years, we take a look back at how it all began. It might still be an abandoned railroad line today, if not for the tireless efforts of a handful of local advocates who never gave up on their pioneering vision. This is the story of the Minuteman Commuter Bikeway, a revolutionary trail that spans 10 miles through the towns of Bedford, Lexington, Arlington, and Cambridge, feeding into the Alewife subway station and taking the Red Line on into Boston.
So many people come into the Freight House Welcome Center not knowing that there was a railroad here before. They thought that the bikeway was carved through the woods to be a bikeway. They didn't realize that it all started in 1846.
Benjamin Muzzy was a tavern owner in Lexington. At the time, Lexington was a pretty sleepy place. It was another country town, a lot like Arlington, very agricultural. But he thought, gee, if I could have a railroad come to Lexington, then I could have customers come to my tavern, maybe on a day trip or what have you. And so he started agitating in Lexington for a railroad about the same time that people in Arlington were agitating for a railroad. And the railroad was up and running by 1846.
The railroad was such an important part of society for so long, and certainly in a small town like Bedford, life revolved around the railroad. That's how people traveled into the city. It's how goods arrived in Bedford, how products were shipped out of Bedford.
Obviously, the railroad contributed a lot to our economic development, and so that really helped make that corridor the sort of a corridor of commerce and business and to a certain extent industry.
But by the time the highway system became very developed and people began owning their own automobiles more and more, the need for the railroad declined.
People wanted to drive cars everywhere. They stopped riding passenger trains, and the passenger trains then started losing money, so the railroads disinvested. And so people didn't want to ride the trains because they weren't being invested in, and so the whole thing spiraled down very quickly. And eventually what happened was that there was basically one train per day running on this branch. And even that, in 1977, that one train per day got caught in a blizzard. The train got stuck in Bedford in the blizzard, and it couldn't get back out. And so the MBTA had to send out a snowplow to save the train, but they also basically suspended service at that point. And that was the end of the railroad.
There was a proposal to extend the Red Line from Alewife, to go beyond Alewife with the Red Line, which means it would go right through Arlington and Lexington. And people in Arlington were absolutely opposed to that, unless it went right through and stopped somewhere else. Nobody wanted the end of it in their town. We started talking about, wouldn't it make a great bikeway? We wrote a proposal and said, you know, here's a way to get people out of their cars and into Alewife Station on bikes.
We didn't have any trails like this in Massachusetts, and the whole attitude back then was bicycles are for kids.
Many people were very skeptical and very opposed, and one of their predictions was that no one would use it. And why should we spend money on such a thing when nobody will be on it?
Now, back in the 70s, there was nobody doing estimates of how many people would use a bicycle trail. And there was no internet, so you couldn't even Google it to find out there were no studies. You just had to kind of start from scratch.
We named it right from the beginning the Minuteman Commuter Bikeway, because the intention is to get commuters, give them a good way to get to the end of the red line.
But state transportation officials were not on board with the idea originally, and it proved to be one of the first hurdles local advocates would face. It took time to persuade state officials that bicycling was a viable commuting option.
Back in the 70s, the idea of using transportation funds for bicycles was outlandish. Plus, that this very valuable corridor could have been used for the red line extension, and there were folks who thought that that is a more intensive use. We really shouldn't be squandering this on a trail. So there was a lot of delay. There was a lot of foot dragging. There was a lot of no, we don't want to do it, and we're gonna stall it, and we're gonna keep stalling until those people go away. Well, those people did not go away.
My concentration was on getting supporters organized and finding funding and getting it to happen.
The state also said, we are not paying for a recreational facility. It has to have a transportation purpose. I was at a meeting with the Mass Department of Public Works Commissioner and his top aides. So the commissioner turned to me and said, so Kathy, let's have an update on the Minuteman project, and his right-hand man snorted out loud. And it was acceptable to do that because, we're talking about bicycles at a highway meeting. What's going on here? I think it was seen as frivolous, not a serious transportation option. Of course, now it's accepted, but back then it hadn't been done yet.
State transportation officials eventually embraced the idea of the bikeway, but many folks who lived next to the abandoned railroad line strongly opposed it, as did others throughout the various towns.
Many people who abut the bikeway were concerned that this was somehow going to bring crime and other bad things to their homes, which is a little bit silly, and we proved it to be silly by getting studies from other places.
I still remember the meeting where it was entertaining in a way. The opponents were quite vociferous. They were saying, they had an imagination about all the horrific things that would happen. They literally got up and said, people could break into my house and steal my television. And, you can do that from the street side much more easily with a car. But anyway, my daughters will be in danger.
People were going to ride in on bicycles and steal their televisions and assault their daughters.
There was fear of crime. Well, I can take you to abandoned railroad beds where it's broken glass, teenage drinking, really questionable behavior. You don't want to leave an abandoned rail bed for people to hang out. That's what you have going on. We also know that property values. People are like, it's going to ruin people are going to be in my backyard, wandering in, urinating at my barbecue.
We were worried about keeping the abutters from killing the whole project.
The way this trail was built, it was the state will pay for the construction, but you have to maintain it and police it. So the town really had to buy in.
It went on and on for years and years, and there would be hearings from time to time, and we would have to get people out to the hearings because we knew that the abutters and the other opponents would be there in force, and we had a telephone chain. There was no internet, so you call 10 people and they'll call 10 more people, and we got our people at the meetings.
I remember not knowing what was going to happen, because the Board of Selectmen in Lexington would have to make the decision. And I know that there was conversations about who's for it, who's against it, how's the vote going to come out. And of course, when you have a lot of people putting on a lot of pressure, people can also change their minds. So I'm just happy that that Board of Selectmen had the courage to say, yeah, this is a good idea and we want it.
I'm describing a 17-year process. It just went on and on and on.
And just as all the pieces were finally coming together, an unexpected legal complication stalled the process even more, tying up several more years of delay.
The final thing was we had funding in place, we had everybody ready to go. We couldn't get the railroad right-of-way legally abandoned. It has to go through a federal process. Boston and Maine Railroad had gone bankrupt long before, but it was all tied up in various courts. And Alan went and got help from Rails to Trails, the national organization. And they sent a couple of lawyers, and they finally got the right-of-way officially abandoned, and then we were able to go ahead with it.
After nearly 20 years of persuading and planning, the construction of the Minuteman Commuter Bikeway officially started in 1991. The demand was immediate, so strong in fact that people started bicycling on the dirt path while construction was still underway.
The moment those rails came up and the ties came up, people just pounced on it.
People started riding as soon as there was a flat surface available.
Construction crews had to post notices asking people to stop using the bikeway while under construction because it was interfering with their ability to build it. The Minuteman Commuter Bikeway officially opened in the fall of 1992 in Arlington and in the spring of '93 in Lexington and Bedford.
One prominent person in the town, right after it was opened, called me up and said, "I was out on your bike path today. It was like the start of the Boston Marathon." And I thought, oh, well, that's a good measure of success.
For us, the Minuteman was the first one of any substance, and it proved or disproved all of these theories that were positive or theories that were negative.
The Minuteman Commuter Bikeway is listed as number 5 in the Rail Trail Hall of Fame, one of only 30 rail trails in the entire country that have earned that distinction.
This is the one that works better than almost anyone in America, and it's really unique. It connects a highway culture, but it also connects a town center, but then it connects to commuter rail, a subway, there's still Route 2. When you have this connectivity, it lights up. There's as many bikes some days going into Alewife as there are cars.
It's great for property values, it's great for your kids, it's great for merchants in town.
And what does that do to your town centers? It's impactful.
Even with the proliferation of bikeways in other towns, people still will come to ride on the Minuteman Bikeway because they say it's a more enjoyable experience to them. Maybe it's the changing landscapes along the way or attractions they can see along the way. But it's still a very popular bikeway even with the other bikeways coming online these days.
Once this was built, a lot of folks would come to other meetings where trails were being talked about, and they'd say, we had a lot of opposition. And a lot of those folks are admitting that they're glad they lost because this has been such a boon for our community. And if you look at the real estate ads, nobody's going to mention something in a real estate ad that they think is a detriment to their community. And you'll find lots of ads that say, near the bikeway, adjacent to the bikeway.
As the bikeway became established and began to prove itself as to what it really is, you began to see people taking down their barriers from the yard so they can get to the bikeway. So there's a whole change in philosophy over the years.
The Minuteman Commuter Bikeway was one of the first bikeways built in Massachusetts, and 25 years later, it still serves as a shining example of what's possible. Today, many communities throughout the state are actively advocating for bikeways in their own cities and towns, seeing firsthand the success of the Minuteman Commuter Bikeway.
I will tell you this, Middlesex County is going to blow you away in the next 10 years. Because we're going to plug this one into the Bruce Freeman, into the Assabet River, into the Mass Central, and plug them into commuter rail stations, highway destinations, subway stations, retail districts, national parks, other attractions. It's just going to keep getting better.